Welcome to episode 124 of TV's Top 5, the Hollywood Reporter's TV podcast. I'm Lesley Goldberg, West Coast TV editor, and I'm joined by my friend, co-host, and THR's chief TV critic, Dan Fienberg. Hi, Dan.
What up, Lesley?
I went to Avengers Campus. It was pretty cool.
I hear all the cool kids are starting to go to all the cool parks. A friend of the five, Chris Hayner's been posting pictures from whatever the heck that little old park there is out in Orlando is. Yeah, a little bit. You know, it's optimistic, but apparently not optimism if you actually were there. It's only optimism for the rest of us who are still waiting for the right time.
Well, we had tickets that were going to expire, so we wound up going while it was still at 35% capacity. And we did both parks. You know, we did a VIP tour, so we got on a lot of stuff. The Web Slingers thing is very fun. But yeah, it was really nice to kind of just take a day, you know, off of email and go back out into the world again. And I gotta say, man, Disneyland's doing it right. You know, it never felt really crowded. I think the longest we waited in line, and yes, the VIP pass helped that, but the longest we waited in line was maybe 15 minutes for a churro, which I will stand in that line any day, every day if I have if I had the choice, because those churros are good.
They are. Anyway, so yes, everyone should move back into society at the rate they feel accustomed to or comfortable with, whether it's in the Heights this weekend or waiting for F9 in a couple weeks or whatever your spirit moves you to do. But
and what about you, Dan? You got out too.
I did. I spent a couple days with friends and family in Chicago, which was also weird in terms of people with masks and varying different restrictions and whatnot, but you know, I mostly kept covered, and that's currently what I'm comfortable with, but it's good to see human beings, and so I hope everybody is beginning to see human beings again and keeping up good spirits, because it's been a long 17 years that we've been locked in our respective apartments. So,
and speaking of good spirits and good times, happy early birthday to you, my friend.
Well, fine. Happy early anniversary to you, my co-host and friend. Jeez. Okay. So yes, now we've now wished each other early things, and a happy Flag Day to all who celebrate.
That's right. Well,
let's get to business.
Let's get down to business. Leading off in this week's headlines, Seth MacFarlane is reviving Ted as a live-action TV series and will write and return to voice the teddy bear in a prequel series for Peacock. Elsewhere at the NBCU streamer, Billy Porter is reteaming with his Broken Hearts Club writer-director Greg Berlanti for a showbiz family drama for the streamer. Porter will pen the script for the drama, which will include a character based on his own life.
Lesley is not a TV critic or a movie critic, but she is a fan of Broken Hearts Club.
One of my all-time favorite movies, and if you haven't seen it, rent it. Stream it, find it, email me, I'll send you the screener, or I'll send you the DVD to borrow. It's fantastic. And it was Berlanti's first movie. He wrote and directed it, and it's a gem. And with a fantastic cast.
Continuing with headlines, HBO Max's breakout comedy Hacks, starring Gene Smart, has been renewed for a second season, and also back for a second season will be Shadow and Bone at Netflix. You can listen to our conversations with the respective showrunners behind those series in episodes 120 and 117, respectively.
In castings, Taraji P. Henson will play Miss Hannigan in NBC's live production of Annie.
I can buy that. Mom co-creator Gemma Baker is leaving the Chuck Lorre nest for an overall deal with Universal TV. Mayor of Easttown creator Brad Inglesby has inked his own overall deal with HBO. And in other showrunner news, Family Reunion boss Meg Deloche will take over for the ousted Jim Reynolds on the CBS comedy The Neighborhood.
In executive news, Peter Freelander has been promoted at Netflix and will serve as head of U.S. originals for the streamer following a months-long search for Bella Bahara's number 2. Elsewhere, Jordan Hellman will head originals at Hulu. He will fill the void created by Beatrice Springborn, who moved to run UCP last year. And in Golden Globes fallout, president of producers Dick Clark Productions, Amy Thurlow, is out after a 7-year run at the company. So lots going on all fronts this summer as we, usually after upfronts, it slows down, but not really the case this week, man.
'Tis better to be busy than not busy enough.
And with all that out of the way, let's dive into this week's top 5.
Number 1.
Leading off this week, it's official. Chris Harrison is out as the host of all things Bachelor for ABC and Warner Brothers. Joining us to break down what happened is THR's resident Bachelor Nation expert and friend of the 5, Jackie Strauss. Hey, Jackie, thanks for coming in.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
I feel like last time we had you on, we said that we would have you on next time for something that didn't necessarily relate to some scandal or catastrophe associated with The Bachelor, and we lied, and I apologize.
I will forgive you, Dan.
I mean, none of this feels like it's our fault. On the other hand, we just like putting you on the spot about all things Bachelor Nation. But okay, so I guess first things first, given that this is the continuation of a conversation that we've had you on at least a couple times to talk about, how big of a surprise was what actually officially happened this week?
Well, yeah, I guess this conversation it started in February when this all began. And I think as the weeks went on, it was looking less and less likely that Chris would return for the immediate seasons that were going into production. Like, it seemed pretty obvious he wasn't going to host The Bachelorette, which just started airing, because that went into production pretty quickly after this all went down. And then when they announced Bachelor in Paradise without his name attached, it seemed like that was also pretty unlikely. And then The Bachelorette in the fall, all of this seemed to really come about pretty quickly in the last couple of weeks, even with leaks and things coming out in terms of Bachelor in Paradise was going to have this rotating cast of hosts to replace Chris. And then I think for The Bachelorette, it seemed like not the best time for him to return to host, another diverse star taking over the franchise. So it seemed like it was still a little bit in the future in terms of if he could come back. So I think what was surprising was that he was exiting for good. But it wasn't surprising that he wasn't coming back for 2021.
So how nasty did this get in terms of the deliberations of his exit? We've heard that there was an 8-figure payout.
Yeah, so I think there was a big payout. I think that was correct. I think it might, I think the initial report was it was a mid-figure. I think that might be inflated a little bit, but it was definitely a big number. And, I will say what we definitely know is that Chris retained an attorney back in March, and it's June. So that's definitely a few weeks of negotiations. Like these negotiations have been ongoing. They didn't just come about in the last week or so. It seems like things in the press, took a bit of a turn in terms of leaks in the last week or so, but these negotiations have definitely been going on. So I can only imagine, the things that have been crossing the table in order to get that kind of a payout.
And what responses have you seen from people in the Bachelor and Bachelorette-averse to this news? I mean, I have to assume everyone saw it coming, but that doesn't mean that people didn't have reactions on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole point of this conversation is always this is a step. Chris is not the problem here. I mean, he was a problem in terms of how this all went down. And I think there's been a lot of criticism over how this was handled, but the larger conversation is what changes are happening behind the scenes from the decision makers. Yes, Chris is a host, but he's not an executive producer. He's obviously hasn't been involved in how the next 3 cycles are going to play out. So I think there is an embracing of change for sure. I think that the replacements for The Bachelorette, Tayshia Adams and Caitlin Bristow, I personally think it makes a lot of sense to see 2 women step in and host the Bachelorette season. JoJo Fletcher stepped in for a few episodes last time around when Chris went to drop his son off at college. So you got to see a little bit of that. But, I think it makes sense to have 2 women who have been in her exact position before help guide her through this. And it seems like the reception to them is warm. But I think that there's still a lot of, hesitancy in terms of, okay, so Chris is not coming back. There will things are still a bit up in the air. You know, these two are not hosting every season forever. So I think it's a lot of waiting to see how things will play out. And I think a lot of people still want to hear from the decision makers about what changes are going on behind the scenes.
We know some famous faces from the franchise are stepping in, but in the immediate future, like, do you see a role for Chris Harrison, you know, hosting anything? Like, how damaging do you think this is for his career? Not that I'm really worried about his career. The guy's got more money than he knows what to do with.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of these Bachelor stars have built their brands on the Bachelor brand. You know, there's so many wine labels because this is kind of the very few, the rare show that is appointment TV where people like to drink their wine and hate watch it or love watch it on Monday night. And that has turned into a lot of business opportunities for a lot of people. So Chris definitely has business opportunities around The Bachelor that probably will be going away or have gone away. But having said that, you know, it'll be interesting to see who wants to swoop him up in terms of other places. You know, it's not now just looking at the direct competitors. There's streaming. There's a lot more options on the table. You know, I think time will tell in terms of the damage, but even you saw immediately there were a ton of former stars within the show, including leads, who expressed their support, who said, you know, love you. This is, you know, who kind of insinuated this is not how they wanted things to go, and they support him. You know, it's not like people are cheering and jeering that he's gone.
Yeah, one of the things that I wonder is how much this was, you know, ABC and Warner Brothers, which, when we should note, Warner's is the lead on all things Bachelor Nation. If this was the studio, which now has Channing Dungey at the top instead of Peter Roth, but how much was this, what Harrison did, an opportunity for the studio saying, you know what, let's make a change. Let's diversify this. This is an easy way. Changing out a host is a good opportunity to do things. We saw ABC do that with Dancing with the Stars, with Tyra Banks coming in. You know, they've done it across the spectrum, you know, in easy ways to update their unscripted shows. And, you know, they've got a very stringent set of diversity and inclusion standards that they wanted to get done in 2020 and 2021, and, you know, with different steps throughout the forthcoming years too. So how much do you think this was just ABC and Warner Brothers looking to make a change, and saying also at the same time, Chris Harrison's been with this franchise for 19 years. He's making a ton of money every season. So now you can bring this in, reduce costs, improve diversity. It's kind of a win all around.
Yeah, I agree with you on all of those points. And now this franchise also has Tayshia and Caitlin, who are really great representatives to go out and say, hey, look, we're part of the change. And they're right. They are. But it's a bit of a Band-Aid at this point. And furthermore, it shouldn't be on Tayshia and Caitlin to have to explain away this franchise. Like, they shouldn't have to sit here during their press day and say, here's what's going on behind the scenes. They're brand new in these roles. They do not have, you know, EP credits. They don't have those kind of behind the scenes seat at the table that, you know, perhaps Chris might have had, or, you know, a more seasoned person would have. So I definitely agree with you that this is an opportunity for change. This franchise particularly was on the receiving end of such backlash starting from the summer of 2020 in terms of inclusivity and wanting to see more changes, starting with the cast, starting with the leads, starting with the faces. So this is a face. You know, they had their first Black Bachelor. Now they have more diverse hosts coming in. Although it remains to be seen what will happen with Bachelor in Paradise. And I think, to your point, you know, just getting in diverse hosts doesn't mean the show is going to be more diverse. It doesn't mean it's going to speak to a more inclusive audience. There's a lot of things you have to do to open that net and to really be truly authentic and inclusive in your storytelling.
Yeah. So what do you think, you know, how soon do you think Netflix snaps up Chris Harrison to host their, like, who was it again? Colton Underwood? Did I get that right?
Yes,
who's doing the show behind his coming out for Netflix?
Yeah, and they're buds. I mean, Colton expressed his support publicly. They each actually expressed their support for each other recently. That could be interesting. Maybe if they're still filming, I'm not sure if they are, but I think that I don't think Chris is going to have a problem in terms of finding another gig. I don't know. Maybe it could even be, all these streamers are looking to get into the reality dating world and dating game. So maybe they would tap him for that kind of expertise. Maybe he won't pop up on NBC, but I could see him going to a streamer.
Excellent. Well, thank you, as always, for adding some clarity to the cacophony of news around the Bachelor universe. And next time, Jackie, we'll totally have you on to talk about something that isn't a Bachelor scandal.
I'm not going to hold my breath for that one, though, man.
Always great to see you guys, whatever we're talking about.
Thanks, Jackie.
Number 2.
Up second, cue your sad heart song. NBC has canceled Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist after discussions about moving the series to the network's streaming counterpart, Peacock, fizzled. This is where Lesley will now explain to us whether we should be permanently sad or whether there's still any hope. So, Lesley, what do you know about what actually went down about attempts to get a third season for Zoe wherever it would land?
Well, conversations are still ongoing. So before we get into the nitty gritty of everything here, it's important to note that Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist was a co-production between Lionsgate Television and NBC's Universal Television. So what does that mean? It means Lionsgate was the lead studio. They put up the most financing for the show. And given the fact that it was a co-production, it made moving the show to Peacock a little bit harder than if Universal Television owned it outright and moved it to say, we're going to just move it from this place on NBC in our ecosystem to the streamer, which is still in our ecosystem, and we'll redo some deals, etc. But to me, what I foresee as being the bigger problem is Peacock probably, and everyone wants exclusivity. So, and Peacock probably wanted that if Zoe was going to move to Peacock for a third season. So the show also streams on Hulu, which is, of course, owned by Disney. And what that means in this context is Hulu paid a licensing fee to have the series. So that means that's another revenue stream, right? So in order for Peacock to have the show exclusively, they would have had to pay, NBC Universal would have had to pay more money to get and keep the show because they would want it to be exclusive to Peacock, right? A reason to come and subscribe to Peacock and get it off of Hulu. So that's more revenue that Lionsgate would have requested from Universal Television. Meanwhile, Universal knows first and foremost that the show is, while it's a critical breakout and an awards player for star Jane Levy, it's a ratings dud on linear. It's allegedly a really strong performer on digital. Obviously, we don't have any idea on just how big or what it does on digital, because nobody releases any kind of traditional viewership metrics. So for a show like, NBC is going to know, like that the show is also it has been on Peacock before, so they know what the metrics are. They also probably know what the metrics are on Hulu because of the licensing deal. So if they're sitting there and saying, we need to pay more to get this show, and it's just kind of a meh performer, whether it's linear or digital, why are you going to pay more for something that is not necessarily going to perform well, even if it's exclusive? So would that be enough of a draw? Is it worth spending more money to get the show on a streaming service? And the answer, it looks like, is no. So like I said, Lionsgate TV has said, they put out a statement with the cancellation broke, and saying they are going to shop the show outside of the NBC Universal ecosystem. So one of the things that I'm curious about is, if they do find a buyer, if Universal Television will remain on board as a co-pro, or if it'll revert 100% to Lionsgate, or if Lionsgate will say, okay, Universal will take you out, and then hypothetically say Hulu is like, you know what? We believe in this. It fits with our brand, which it really does when you look at Hulu's brand of originals. They could say, okay, well, why don't we, ABC Studios, why don't you come in as a co-producer on it? That way you have a piece of the pie, you have some ownership, which we've talked about is so important in this streaming era. And, we'll lay it off, so it'll be a co-pro between partially of Disney and continue to be a co-pro with Lionsgate. And you basically reduce the costs associated when you do a co-pro, which is, for a broadcast show, nobody wants to put all their eggs in these baskets, because you can look at the ratings across linear and even with 7 days of delayed ratings, and it's just no one's watching broadcast. No one's watching it on actual broadcast, even with delay. Everyone's watching content on streaming. Like, obviously, water is wet, right? So that's, that to me is the big takeaway here. What happens next? I'm sure they're going to take meetings all over town for the show. There's been a big backlash. Creator Austin Winsberg, former TV's Top 5 guest, has come out and said that he refuses to believe the show is dead. He's encouraging people to tweet to save it, and obviously going to be working hard with Lionsgate to find that show a new home. So, Dan, what about you? This is a big deal. This is a big loss for broadcast.
It's a big loss for broadcast simply because there aren't that many shows on broadcast that have, honestly, critical buzz or acclaim or embrace on the level that Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist did have. On the other hand, that can only get you so far. I'm a practical realist on this one. I understand that it's one thing if all of the TV critics in your Twitter feed are very sad that a show is canceled, but if you go on our wonderful colleague Rick Porter's list of the year's top broadcast shows, which ran this week on THR, and you have to go down that list pretty damn far before you get to Zoe, and that's just how it goes. As you say, really no one's watching things live or even live +7 on broadcast anymore. You go to Rick's list and, it's football, it's The Masked Singer, and then it's a handful of kind of usual suspects, things like, as we always say, Grey's Anatomy and its longevity, pretty remarkable. This Is Us, well, the last season's coming next year. So, yeah, those two 911 shows on Fox, they really do extremely well. Some Chicago stuff, well, there's a reason why why Dick Wolf will have 85 hours of primetime programming next week. And then, you know what show does a pretty remarkable audience? The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, which is in some part why we have the wonderful Jackie Strauss on our podcast to talk about it, is because you look at the ratings for that show and whatever controversy or ugliness that show has had and whatever mockery people like to do about it, that is a show that, given its longevity, is amazingly steady with people. Now, regarding Zoe, I just feel bad about it because a couple years ago, and I tweeted about this, there were a handful of broadcast dramas that actually were trying to do slightly different things. It was remarkable to see, like, oh my God, here are actually a handful of somewhat buzzy dramas. And you had Zoe that came out at mid-season. You had Emergence and Stumptown on ABC. You had Evil on CBS. Well, Emergence was canceled after a season. Stumptown was renewed and then canceled. Evil was renewed and finally moved to Paramount Plus, where it will premiere in a couple weeks. And then you had Zoe that was removed and now is that was renewed rather, and then is now wherever it is. So there's no incentive, if you look at the track record, for broadcast networks to try to do anything differently. The way I tweeted about it yesterday was there's no incentive for creative people to attempt to bring their different ideas to broadcast. And I think that's true, except for money. There's definitely no incentive, though, for the networks to be trying to do creative things. Because if you can just get a bigger audience by sticking a different city after the numbers 911 or a different municipal authority after the word Chicago, why would you try doing something different? Why would you try doing something which, in the case of something like Zoe, was very clearly an expensive show, was very clearly a logistically challenging show, and just a show that tried doing a lot of things and did a lot of things well. I loved the performances. I loved a lot of the musical numbers. Did I think sometimes the show got a little bumpy in its storytelling? Yes. But most of the time when it did that, I felt like it was doing that because it was trying to do ambitious things. Like this season's the state of blacks in the tech industry storyline. It wasn't a storyline that I thought Zoe was completely equipped to handle as well as it necessarily needed to be. But on the other hand, I understand why they thought that was something they wanted to tell, because it's a big story. And so I would rather they try it and not succeed completely than to just not bother trying and just do the same things over and over again. I've seen a lot of people talking about how the show ended on a big cliffhanger. I'm not going to spoil the cliffhanger, but what I'll say is I don't think it did. I will insist to anyone who will listen that of a certain type of ending, this is actually a conclusive ending to the show. It is a show that shows that the choices made by the main character might have been the right choices. It didn't resolve anything. It didn't give answers, but I don't think it's a cliffhanger. But it's cliffhanger if you want it to be and if you're desperate to get more. So yeah, I feel bad about this. It might have been nice if they could have waited a couple weeks just to see if maybe Jane Levy got an Emmy nomination, to see if it got a few stray other nominations. But I don't know that you can count on that. I don't think NBC was like, well, there's maybe a 90% chance it's going to be nominated for these things. So if we kick it around a little bit longer, whatever, or Peacock or Lionsgate or anyone, I don't think anyone could have counted on the middle of July and Emmy nominations being the thing that will boost the profile of this show, unfortunately. So
yeah, we should note that they did try to boost the profile. They did an entire Memorial Day marathon of the show on E, which is obviously part of the NBC Universal fold, and that was designed to try to expose the show to a new audience that maybe missed it, whether it be on NBC or Hulu or Peacock. But they attempted to get some more eyeballs on it. They promoted it. They're submitting it. They did a bunch of FYC things for it. The piece that comes back to, when we talk about broadcast networks and their abilities or lack thereof to take risks, one thing that I always think is so fascinating, because, I talked to all the studio chiefs after upfronts recently for a story you can read on THR, but one of the things when I asked them, like, what's the appeal? Like, how do you get top creators to bring their original ideas to broadcast? And a lot of them said the same thing. You're not just bringing it to broadcast, you're bringing it to streaming, because all of these networks now have streaming counterparts. And, if you're the CW, you've got possibly 3 different ones with CW Seed and Paramount Plus if it's a show that's owned by CBS, and HBO Max if it's a show that's owned by Warner Brothers. So just because it airs on broadcast or it originates on broadcast, that's not where it ends up. All of these shows are going to eventually live on streaming, and that's predominantly where people watch them. Like, for all the fans of Younger, which, had its series finale this week, most people don't realize that it was a TV Land original when TV Land still did originals, and they don't do those anymore, So, and I remember being at TCA years ago for a panel with Shameless and David Nevins when he was still exclusively at Showtime, complaining that most people thought that Shameless was a Netflix original instead of it being a Showtime original series. So, this is the landscape we're in. And I think, yes, the challenge is going to be on these broadcast networks to reach creators and say, come here. Broadcast is just a first window, because you can still promote a show coming to streaming, even if it's at your own streaming service with a secondary push. So I don't know, it just, the state of broadcast, the state of the entire ecosystem is so confusing and so hard to cut through. And it's changing so rapidly that I don't think these broadcast networks can really keep up. And it's sad because, as you said, the biggest opportunity to make money is to create a hit on broadcast. This Is Us ending, next year, Brooklyn Nine-Nine ending. Those are shows that ran 6 seasons. And I think Brooklyn is 8 seasons. Streaming shows they live to 3 seasons. If you're lucky, 3 seasons. So the opportunity to create a show that runs more than 100 episodes and is sold all over the world only exists on broadcast.
Even within that, you still get the situations, and we've talked about this several times, about how it was David Evans and executives who convinced the Clarice team, for example, that they wanted to be on broadcast rather than be on streaming, which was what they wanted. And then after 1 season on broadcast,
guess what? You were right.
So, and roughly the same with Evil. I think Evil felt really much more like a cable show than it felt like a broadcast show. Well, okay, it aired on CBS, it got renewed on CBS, but now it's off to Paramount Plus. So, to me, Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist really isn't implausible as a broadcast show. It's a wide umbrella tent, whatever metaphor you want, show. It swings for big emotions. It swings for big, populist, happy, sad, excited, angry moments. There's no reason why it shouldn't have been a breakout hit. It clearly was not. But to me, the passion of the audience feels like it's a valuably passionate audience, and to me it felt like it would have been a good fit on Peacock. But I don't know that we know what is or isn't a big fit on Peacock. For example, Girls 5 Eva still not renewed yet, and yet I think in our perception, which is completely without statistical data, in our perception it felt like that was a show that cut through a little bit. But did it? Who knows? Did We Are Lady Parts, which we raved about last week and we talked with the showrunner, did that cut through? Because if Girls 5 Eva cut through and if We Are Lady Parts cut through, of course Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist feels like it should have been on the same service as those things, but we don't know. And so that ends up being a part of the why do you guys complain that you don't get ratings from services where ratings have no actual value? Well, it's true. Ratings have no actual value. There's no reason why they should give us ratings. But on the other hand, our ability to speak intelligently about absolutely anything depends on having data. And at this moment, we have no data. So that remains why we complain about these things, is because it means that we're talking out of our asses more often than we should be about subjects that we would like to be speaking intelligently about whenever humanly possible.
Yeah. And I just want to say one last thing. Look, Peacock is still relatively new. They don't have their big breakout out of the box hit just yet. They've got, Battlestar Galactica in the works. A lot, they obviously let off headlines with Seth MacFarlane doing a Ted prequel. That's almost $1 billion franchise. That's sure to bring in some eyeballs. But one of the things that I wonder is once Peacock is on better footing, maybe the Olympics will actually help it. Because if you remember, Peacock was supposed to launch around the Olympics, and that was going to be its coming out moment. And it really hasn't had that yet. And it's now, a year old. But one of the things that I think about with a show like Zoe's is once Peacock does have its big breakout hit and it has got that must-have status that HBO Max kind of has found with a string of really great originals with Flight Attendant and Hacks, etc. But once Peacock does get there, I have this sense that people will find Zoe's and be like, why wasn't there a third season? And it'll be like this big delayed reaction, like when you hit Netflix after it completely bombed on Lifetime. So stay tuned. Fingers crossed Zoe's does find a home. But until then, stay tuned to THR.
Up next,
Number 3.
We're going to continue talking about the things that people strive to do in order to make money in an ever-changing TV landscape. In this case, we're going to talk about the rather strange, but I guess logical news that apparently Netflix is launching its own online retail hub. Lesley, what was the news that broke this week about Netflix? And other than to make more money, is there anything that we can learn from it?
Yeah, you pretty much summed that up, Dan. So Netflix announced this week that it was launching Netflix.shop in the US. It will feature branded merchandise to support the streamer's film and TV shows. So you can buy a pillow for Lupin. You can eventually, get gear to support Bridgerton and Stranger Things, etc. And, as you said, Dan, this is basically another revenue stream. We talk so much on this show about why ownership matters, right? Because these streamers want to own their content and because it's more profitable for them. Everything comes down to money. We just talked about it with Zoe, where NBCU probably would have had to pay more money to keep the show for Peacock to offset a licensing deal for Hulu. So this is the same idea for Netflix. So this is the streaming giant recognizing that subscribers have kind of plateaued. They've got over 200 million. They're still the market leader. But how do you create more revenue streams when you have these big shows? You're obviously not selling them, in any kind of syndication market because Netflix is a global streamer. So its shows are already available all over the world. That eliminates that revenue stream. So how do you bring in more money when you're not kind of adding subscribers hand over fist the way that you used to be? This is how. So, they've got deals with Target. You can buy Stranger Things sweatpants at Target and all these other retail establishments. But this is, make no mistake, entirely about money. And the question that I have is, one of the knocks on Netflix, and we talk about this a lot too, is they drop all the episodes all at once, right? The binge model. So you have a breakout hit like Bridgerton, and maybe you get, in the conversation for a month, if you're lucky, and then it goes away, and then it's on to the next thing, right? Or if the season comes out and it's a dud, it just disappears and there's no chatter anymore about it, right? Some of these big hits, like, Shadow and Bone was a monster hit for them, allegedly, if you believe their 2 minutes of viewing data, etc. But the conversation around it is gone because the episodes already came out and it was a big frantic weekend or 2 weekends, and then it's on to the next thing. So when you have a cyclical show like, a cyclical nature of originals like that, is that going to be enough to drive interest to buy a Bridgerton hoodie, right? Or to buy a Tiger King t-shirt? Like, I don't know who's going to wear a Tiger King t-shirt, but like, you know what I mean? Like that's the big question. And I think it's a fair one, but it's also, in the grand scheme of things, this is a smart move for Netflix because you see what Disney does, right? Like they're not like, look, Netflix, at least right now, is not going to open any kind of storefront. So you're not going to be able to go into a Disney store and buy, 17 stuffed Mickeys, as swag or gifts for whatever, So this is just a push to create another revenue stream and bring in some more money at a time when the price of content continues to escalate and a time when you're really leaning into your brand. Whether or not that works when you've got, a company like Disney doing it so well, big question mark.
And it was interesting, the New York Times story about this kind of seemed to give the indication that this was going to be more of a boutique gift shop kind of thing than simply a wholesale, basically all the things that Netflix has done at Walmart, the will this be a Stranger Things sweatpants kind of store. It doesn't sound like that is what they're planning on doing this for. On the other hand, if that turns out to be where the money is, I suspect they probably would. So yeah, for now, it sounds as if the intent is to make it seem upscale and to attempt to kind of buttress upscale brands. And of course, the other thing that Netflix knows is because Netflix has the data on absolutely everything. We don't know it, but they have the data on everything. Netflix knows which of its shows are the most, as CBS and ABC always would used to boast about upscale. The upscale shows issue. Netflix knows the average household income of every show that they have ever put on, I assume. And so I guess they have a sense of which shows have the audiences where they can find a way to leverage, I don't know, maybe not a pair of sweatpants, but I don't know, a $75 expensive hoodie or something. And so we'll see if they can stick to that or if it really does just become, a repository for Stranger Things Funkos and stuff like that, which I don't think they imagine it wanting to be, but it's all just other revenue streams. And, for more on other revenue streams, you should definitely check out last week's discussion with the Netflix executive, who is one of the people in charge of the international marketplace, because if numbers have plateaued locally, they have not plateaued internationally. And so that is where more money is even than a Lupin sweatshirt is in shows like Lupin. So
right, with global adaptations, and Netflix is going to do its own local language. Yeah, the interview that we did with international VP Originals Larry Tans was fascinating, and definitely go back and check that out. One of 3 great interviews in last week's episode. I'm biased, but I really, really love the discussions that we had with the showrunners from We Are Lady Parts and Lupin. So up next, it's time for our showrunner spotlight segment.
Number 4.
In continuing our tradition, or, our attempt to give people interviews with the people who are making the shows that people want to talk about, we are pleased to welcome the showrunner of Loki, Marvel's 3rd series for Disney+. Head writer Michael Waldron's credits include Community, Rick and Morty, and the upcoming wrestling drama Heels. For Stars, he's also writing the Marvel feature Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
And before we get started, just a quick fair warning that this interview does contain spoilers from the series premiere of Loki.
Thank you for joining us, Michael.
Thank you guys for having me.
So going back to the beginning, I had some initial questions, curiosities, etc., about how someone whose background was in animation and largely with comedy would sort of fit into this project. But it took only a couple minutes into the actual first episode for me to see how your background actually flows really well into the approach for this series. How much convincing did you feel like you needed to do when you first got into the room with the Marvel people?
I guess not as much as you'd think, which is probably a testament to how insane they are over over there. Um, they were Marvel, especially now. They're very willing, to take chances on folks. I mean, I guess they always have been. Robert Downey Jr. when they cast him as Iron Man way back when, that wasn't an obvious, slam dunk thing, and so they took a chance on me, and I think this show in particular, because there was going to be so many big kind of out there science fiction elements. The background on Rick and Morty was helpful, and in that sense, I think that animation background that worked in my favor.
Well, one of the things that Rick and Morty does so well, and that's a big part of Loki as a series, is working with repetition and variation, kind of taking a bit and then escalating it as far as it can possibly go. What did you learn about that sort of variation, humor, and drama on Rick and Morty that you were able to bring to this?
That's a really nice way of saying just beating something to death. Just beating it to hell into the absolute ground. I mean, I came up obviously under Dan Harmon on Community. That was my first job. I was an intern on the very first season of Rick and Morty, and then I was a writer's PA on season 5 of Community, and then was fortunate enough to go back as a writer on Rick and Morty, and so I just had a lot of time, to watch how all these brilliant people constructed jokes and everything, and mine drama from it, and yeah, there is something great about just taking the remarkable and making it unremarkable, I guess, which is just like the craziest things you can think of, and just like digging into it in such a granular level that it just becomes horrifyingly mundane. I guess that doesn't, as I describe it, it doesn't really sound like thrilling television, but hopefully as an experiential thing for a protagonist, it's pretty cool to watch, Loki in this case go through it all.
Is it different making it funny versus making it dramatic when you're working within the repetition loop cycle?
Yeah. And I think, especially on a show like Loki, we never really wanted to. I never thought of it as a comedy. I don't think of it as a comedy at all. I think, hopefully it is funny, because I think the best dramas are funny. It's like Sopranos and Mad Men are two of the funniest shows ever, but those are dramas to me. So hopefully the comedy just is a little more natural and comes from watching Loki respond kind of organically to all this crazy stuff he's dealing with, as opposed to the maybe more traditional setup punchline kind of thing we would do in Rick and Morty.
In terms of the bigger picture here, what was your pitch for Loki that landed you the job, and what were you hoping to bring out with this specific timeline version of the character?
My pitch really was, and I've said this before, and it looks kind of lame in a headline, as do most of the things I find myself saying in interviews. But my pitch was like, okay, we're doing a show about Loki. What if that was the best TV show anybody had ever seen? Because I do feel like this is a once in a an unprecedented opportunity. There's never been anything like the MCU, with 10 years of investment and engagement in it. And Loki is arguably, the most beloved kind of defining villain of that mythology of a blockbuster movie franchise. And now we're getting to put him in a prestige television series, and spend 6 hours and go into that character and examine him in a totally new, more in-depth way. So that just, it felt like the ceiling for the show was so high to me. And I just tried to really communicate that was my ambition with it. And yeah, they bought it. They bought it hook, line, and sinker.
I want to talk a little bit about something that that got the internet in a bit of a tizzy and excitement earlier this week, and that was the discussion of the idea that Loki is going to be gender fluid in this show, and that that's something that is important to the show that you made. And you know, you've done interviews where you've said that it's important, but also where you've said that you don't feel comfortable as a cis white male explaining that to people. And I guess my question is, you know, given that this is something that obviously has actually struck a chord with a large percentage of the audience, people want to talk about this. What can you say by way of reassurance that the conversations that we're having now about it, being excited about it before the show really comes out, that they aren't going to be kind of the peak of the conversation, that this is something that actually is something that people are still going to be talking about it afterwards? It's not going to be an afterthought or an anticlimax.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I would say about that is it was something that our creative team had on our minds and knew was an element of the character and an element of what the fan base was passionate about from the very beginning, you know, and that particular representation was really important. And so it was baked into the DNA of all of our conversations and everything, wanting to get all that stuff right. You know, as for how we handle it in the show, I do really feel like it's better just to watch the show. I'd rather everybody just watch the show. That's going to be a more fulfilling and dramatic execution of it. I hope, you know, I certainly hope that we did right by the fans and by everybody from, you know, from that community and everything. And yeah, that was all of our goals.
Well, how do you think Marvel sort of works as kind of a property through which to be having these conversations? Because I do think it's sort of notable how sexuality and gender identity are not really a part of the DNA of most of these recent shows. This is the third Marvel Disney Plus show. In Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Bucky had a date that he ended without a kiss, and that was pretty much all. That was all there was. That in WandaVision, Wanda and Vision have 2 children, but I'm pretty sure it was all magical. I'm not even sure that Vision has genitals. I mean, which seems like a thing that we can discuss.
That's a different podcast. Yeah, bring me back on. Where is that? Yeah, jeez.
If you have an opinion on the Vision genitals question, I am more than happy to hear it. But do you think that Marvel can be a vehicle through which to discuss things that really it hasn't been? There's discussion of race and gender, obviously, in Marvel properties, but sexuality and gender identity, those have not been in the Marvel package lately.
I think that Marvel can be a vessel to discuss just about anything. You know, I mean, it's the biggest piece of entertainment in the world right now. I would say is what it feels like. You know, that encompasses such a large spectrum of fans. And age ranges and everything, especially when you get into sexuality and everything. There's kids watching shit, and it's like, so the question of Vision's genitals and all of that, like it's like, you know, how much do you want to go into that stuff? I think that's, you know, obviously that's something that you have to figure out and keep defining, but you know, I think look at the people that Marvel's hiring and look at movies like Black Panther, Shang-Chi and you know, all the TV shows coming out and everything. One of my writers, Bisha Ali, creating Miss Marvel and everything. Like there's more and more representation than ever before that you're seeing in a massive media enterprise, and I think it's cool, and you know, I think Marvel definitely will keep paving the trail.
Is that a yes or a no on the Vision genitals question before Lesley goes on to something else?
I can't. That's a Jack Schaefer question. I can't answer that for Jack. I can't. That would be like her telling you about Mobius's genitals. We can't answer for one another.
I applaud your compartmentalization of those things.
Yeah, and this is going to be me completely moving on from that. But, Loki does feature some larger themes at play, like finding your place in this world and issues of identity. What other themes are you looking to explore with this series?
I think, and I've said this a good bit, it's self-reflection and self-assessment. I really believe that's what great television is about. It's like Mad Men isn't necessarily about Don Draper changing to me, but it is about Don gaining a greater awareness of who he is and maybe why he is the way that he is, and looking inward. That's a really rich thing, and that's the kind of journey that can take a long time, and in some ways that's a more profound experience for someone to go through than actually really changing the way they behave. Then maybe that's the thing that has to happen before someone can change, and so self-reflection, that's, I would say that's kind of my biggest thing in the show.
And obviously, when you come into this, and obviously you're writing the next Doctor Strange movie, but how many events in Loki were dictated by Marvel as signposts that they needed you to get to in order to get to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness?
Not nearly as many as you would think. I mean, truly, with these guys, it's like you're working on a project. Make that project just as awesome as you possibly can. Make it kick ass. Make Loki great, and trust that it will naturally and organically fit into the larger blueprint, of which there is one that exists. And and it's like I can't, like, Batman isn't gonna show up, or is he? He might. But in general, the only mandate is just make Loki really good, and then we will find our way to whatever the next chapter in the MCU is.
Well, we have, though, had conversations with head writers. We talked with Jack Schaefer and we talked with Malcolm Spellman, and there have been references to kind of a not literal Marvel menu off of which you're able to order certain characters and certain situations, but sort of the idea that a menu exists to some degree of the things you have access to and the things you maybe don't. What was that experience like to you, however literal or non-literal the Marvel menu was?
Yeah, I mean, the Marvel menu is all of the comics. It's decades and decades of crazy comics and cool stuff and weird stuff. The amazing thing about working in this world is you can take something that in the comics was maybe kind of stupid or didn't really work. It didn't really make sense. But if you pluck it out of the comics and you put it in the MCU, then it's suddenly just awesome. And you're a genius. It's such a hack. It's a hack that makes me a hack. Because it just makes your life a little bit easier. So that's just to say, I was always perusing the Marvel menu. If there was ever a problem or a problem that needed to be solved, some bit of tech, some bit of jargon, or a character or something, we needed to comb through the comics and do everything we could to see if we could pull from the comics first, because that just makes it cool. That makes it awesome. And the only time you're really not, the only stuff that is off the menu is just like stuff that just isn't legally cleared.
But were there any characters or anything that you knew that you wanted to get in specifically where you had to ask permission? Were there any characters that you were told, we need this person for a subsequent installment? Or did you have just total freedom with the people in this universe?
Yeah, Batman. I kept asking about Batman and they kept saying no. And I was like, guys, what are we doing here? There were, I guess to you know, I mean, Judge Renslayer is a great example of that. You know, the character that Goo plays, it was, we wanted to have somebody in a position of authority at the TVA, and you know that sends you searching through, like, okay, who are formidable time related characters, and you know that's how you find Ravonna Renslayer, and then you kind of go down that rabbit hole, and it's like, all right, let's, if we can use that character, then we'll start really building around that.
You did mention that the TVA, the Time Variance Authority, which is obviously introduced in this show, but given the subtitle of the next Doctor Strange movie, how directly does Loki lead into that?
I mean, you're going to have to, I guess everybody will have a better idea of that when Loki's done. All these things feed into each other. Loki, we said the word multiverse a good bit in the pilot, so I'm not going to pretend like the two aren't related in some way. But yeah, time will tell just how related.
I see what you did there. Yeah.
I've used that. I came up with that like 2 days ago. I was like, oh, that's good. Time will tell. I'm going to keep using that one.
You know, so, and speaking of the TVA, you know, it is introduced with this really cool retro animated message that does feel like something you'd see on like a TV at DMV, you know, at some point in time. Was it always the plan to have that be animated, or was that a result of some COVID issues?
No, always animated. Always wanted it to be like that. Always inspired by Mr. DNA from Jurassic Park. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that it wasn't, but also I do think that's how the TVA would do it. It's disarming. It feels friendly. It explains what they do in a kind of like non-threatening way, and it's a lot of sci-fi exposition that you can keep editing down to the wire because it's animated.
You know, as someone who admittedly has trouble following all of the mythology in the MCU, do you kind of see that TVA bit as a way to help viewers like me who often feel overwhelmed with some of this stuff?
I don't know. You tell me, Lesley. How did we do? I hope so.
I thought it was great. I mean, it was incredibly helpful, but it also set up the show, and it also served a larger purpose for you know, a Luddite like me when you're looking at this stuff, and I'm just like, wait, what's happening? There's multiple Lokis, like, you know.
Yeah, that. I mean, I think it's a fair critique to say of the first episode that it's heavy on exposition. I always knew that was a deliberate choice I was making. The action sequence in the first episode to me is Loki and Mobius sitting across a table together, verbally sparring. I just, in a show because it's a series about time travel, and because I know how smart the MCU fans are, and I know, you know, how much they pick everything apart. There's going to be 7 days between each episode. So our logic, to me, really had to stand up to as much scrutiny as it could. And so we wanted to, you know, make sure audiences understood what was going on, and hopefully convey that in the most entertaining way possible. And then shift it to the background. But I just didn't want people to get distracted from the emotional story down the line, because they were like, what the hell does the TVA do, and why do they do it? That would have been a failure to me. So so then that's how we got Miss Minutes.
How has your experience with the Rick and Morty fandom prepared you for the high expectations and high degree of scrutiny that Marvel fans have?
I mean, I'm a fan myself. I've, you know, so I get it. You know, I see the Rick and Morty fans. You're not going to make everybody happy. You can't, and you just simply can't expect to. You know, all you can do is obviously do your best. Leave it all on the field. Understand that there's always probably a better idea. There always maybe was a better way to make make something. But in this case, we're all really proud of what we did. And I think we did justice to the character, and hopefully, we rewarded the investment that all the longtime Loki fans have had in this character for so long. Because that was one thing I was struck by when I came on, even when I was pitching the project, just like kind of lurking among the Loki fandom, for a character that died on screen for however many years ago. Just so much investment. People connect with this character so much. He represents so much to them. They really give a shit. That's why I have this job. And so I hope, what they wanted was just to see a character they love explored in a richer, more complex way than they'd ever seen before. I hope we did that. Yeah.
Yeah, the TVA is also connected to WandaVision, which featured a Nexus Point commercial. What interaction did you have, if any, with Jack Schaefer and Malcolm Spellman, as well as the creators of the Disney Plus shows that are coming after Loki?
Well, the WandaVision room was right next to us. And so that was terrifying for me, because every day I would walk by, they were like 4 or 5 weeks ahead of us. They'd gotten started, and I'd walk by and I'd peek in, because I knew their writer's assistant, Clay. We worked together on Community. And I'd peek inside and I'd just see how much shit they had on the walls. It was so much. They had their room was so organized, and I'm not very organized. And I'd come in, I'd be like, guys, we gotta get stuff on the wall. This is our rooms we gotta look organized. And Jack and I, we had dinner and just got to know one another and kind of figured out, all right, what's each show doing. And her and I became pals, and really, it was good to have a friend who was going through the same thing at the same time. I got to know Malcolm as well. He was several more weeks ahead of us in the process, hurtling toward production, but we would all pass each other in the hallways, each running our hands through our hair, stressed on our way to some various meeting. But it was a nice little camaraderie there as the 3 shows first out the gate, trying to sink or swim. And yeah, it's great. I mean, it was certainly helpful, in Doctor Strange, of which Wanda is a part of, to be able to call Jack Schaefer and really, make sure, hey, you guys did something incredible with WandaVision. Like, how do we make sure we're telling a satisfying next chapter in that story? And then as far as the folks who came after, I mean, Bisha Ali was on our writing staff for Loki, and she became the head writer for Miss Marvel, and she's brilliant and is a huge part of why Loki's great. She wrote episode 3, and then I know Jessica Gao, who created She-Hulk from Rick and Morty. She predated me at Rick and Morty, so it's it's nice that the more and more writers that know each other at the MCU, probably the better.
And in terms of the larger mythology, was it always the plan for Loki to come after WandaVision? Yes.
Yeah, we were always going to be third out the gate.
And, since we're speaking of mythology, it does obviously sound like, from what you're saying, Loki will connect directly into the next Doctor Strange. But, one of the questions that we're always asking the head writers here is about renewals, because, TV shows do get renewed, and some of them will be limited series, and some little limited series wind up getting renewed too. So when you think about Loki and how it connects into the larger MCU, will there be a second season, or is this really just 6 episodes and a bridge to get from one place to another?
That is purely based on the Emmy field next year when we're on. It's just, who are we going to do? Do we want to be in the limited category, or do we want to be in the ongoing? No, I mean, here's what I'll say about that is just I always intended for this season to tell a complete story. And I think we did that. As for, are there stories yet to be told here? We'll find out. But but this, to me, this season is a complete thing that stands on its own.
I'm just happy to hear a writer acknowledge that it's all based on Emmy category, even as a joke. So I don't care if you were being completely serious or not. It was good to hear it.
Well, yeah, we'll never know. We'll never know.
Now, I've only seen 2 episodes, but I'm already fascinated with kind of the off-the-clock lives of the Time Variance Authority staffers. Basically, I'm curious how many episodes you would have to be given before we started going home with some of these people, before we started seeing what a Hunter apartment looks like, before we find out why Casey doesn't know what fish is, etc.
Yeah, you would have been right at home in our writer's room. I mean, that's all the stuff that we'd blow a whole afternoon. That's when it would turn into a comedy writer's room, and then we'd be like, all right, well, I don't know if any of this is all that useful. But I think the interesting question is there even an off the clock life for folks at the TVA? Does that exist? But yeah, that's interesting stuff. There's little hints of that in the comics. In the She-Hulk run that the TVA is at, I think you see like the barracks of the Minutemen and everything, and so we try to do as much world building as we could. But I don't know. There were frequently ideas and stuff that would come up that I'd say, oh, that's like a one-shot comic somebody's got to do. There's a lot of spin-offs and graphic novels I'd love to write about the TVA.
Well, given that you now know, say, a handful of people associated with Marvel, is that a thing that you think you might get the chance to do?
If I ever found the time, maybe, yeah, but then again, the dance card's a little bit full right now, and I'm at the moment, I'm happy to have a little bit of a reprieve from time travel.
But would you want to do, obviously if you're interested in doing it as a comic, but do you think you've created a really impressive world of the TVA, but it feels like there could be a larger show or even an anthology where it's just a different case every single week? Is that something that would be appealing to explore for television?
I mean, certainly. I think, this was, I was not a big, sort of true crime, procedural guy heading into this. My writer's room almost pulled me into it and everything as we were really breaking the show, and then I became a fan. I think it's really exciting, the idea of that there's a world that we've created that feels like it could sustain other stories within it. Hopefully that gives, my hope would be that gives other creators and stuff chances to write them. I hope that those comics that I'm talking about, I hope that's other writers get those chances, and that can be where they get their start and everything. And that maybe there's an appetite to see TVA stuff in the comics and everything. And that can be a platform for, a bunch of cool new voices. You've heard enough from me.
Well, we do always like to wrap these interviews with the same question. What are you watching and enjoying?
Right now I just got into season 2 of For All Mankind. That show is just tremendous. I don't know how I missed it or where the buzz is, but it's so good. Gordo is just such an all-time great character. He and Tracy, that's my favorite TV marriage since Coach Taylor and Tammy Taylor, I think. So I'm loving For All Mankind.
Well, with that Friday Night Lights comparison, you just got me to sign on to For All Mankind. So
what, by telling you it was a good show didn't work to get you to watch, Lesley? Jeez.
Well, you haven't been pestering me the way that you pestered me about Rami.
I did say it was a good show and that people should be watching it. So whatever.
There was some Coach Taylor inspiration for Mobius for sure. That was I was definitely trying to draw on that and some of the just that sort of just just kind of folksy goodness and infuse that character with. So now you're really going to watch Loki. Now I'm just trying to really convince you to like Loki.
Oh.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Michael. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Michael. New episodes of Loki arrive Wednesdays on Disney+.
Number 5.
As usual, we wrap things up with the Critics' Corner. Among this week's major new launches are former Netflix comedy Tuca and Birdie, which returns on its new home at Adult Swim. The Skater Girls of Betty are back for season 2 on Netflix. And you just heard our interview last week with George Kay about part 2 of Lupin, which returns on Netflix this weekend. And Starz launches its Blind Spotting TV sequel. Dan, what you got?
Again, lots of good things. We're in sort of a solid moment of interesting shows for diverse audiences, and I've been enjoying it. So last week there were 3 or 4 shows I recommended, and this week roughly the same. You heard our interview last week with George Kay, as you mentioned, about the second part of the first season, or however they want to classify it, of Lupin. And the last 5 episodes pick right up with the cliffhanger from the 5th episode. So people who have been waiting impatiently since January to find out what happened to Raoul, will find that out fairly quickly. And the 5 episodes back are very, very solid. This really is just a flashy, fun show. And if you've been variable degrees of, I don't know, homebound for the past 15, 17, etc. months, there is a definite pleasure to getting to Paris, going down the Champs-Élysées, seeing the Louvre, all of that. And it continues to scratch that itch really rather wonderfully. Omar Sy is such a freaking star, and this is such a good star vehicle for him. And it's a satisfying show. I find that probably I enjoyed the first half, which I watched with 0 expectations, a bit more than the second half that I watched with actual expectations. And that's just a reality of a situation, is when you really are looking forward to something, probably you're going to, I don't know, maybe not necessarily pick it to pieces, but you're going to watch it with a different eye than when you're just discovering something out of nowhere, which is what most people did with the first season. I was feeling more and more watching these episodes like Lupin is a certain kind of show, a little bit like Killing Eve, and not coincidentally, George Kay worked on Killing Eve, where the necessary contrivances to keep the show entertaining and afloat are not necessarily the types of contrivances that allow a show to have great longevity. So the fact that Hassan Diop is this character who is 50 steps ahead of everybody at all times, who is always the smartest guy in the room, who is always making these last-second escapes, etc. The more that you have those things happen, the better the chance is that you're going to, at a certain point, start finding the plot holes in all of his brilliant things. And I feel like the first half had some of that, and I feel like people who watched the first half later, after some hype built up, already began to notice those things even more. I definitely noticed a lot more of people being like, God, there's a plot hole you could drive a Mack truck through, when they were responding to the show in March than January. It's just the nature of viewership. And I was definitely having more moments like that with these episodes, but it's still a huge amount of fun. The finale of the second part, or the first season, or whatever you want to say, it's wildly entertaining. It's extremely Hitchcockian. Just, a fun show. And if you haven't discovered it yet, definitely worth checking out. We had Crystal Moselle, the creator, director, showrunner of Betty, on the podcast last year at times. I'm going to wait for Lesley to go to her magic Google Doc to tell me which episode it was. Do you have it yet?
That would be episode 79.
Excellent. So that's another show, honestly, that people kind of discovered more gradually. It wasn't a big HBO release because it was a little half-hour show based on a little independent movie that nobody really saw either. It is still such a freeing and joyful show. The second season, because it's a New York City show, they made the decision not to ignore COVID. It is a season where people are wearing masks, and it's actually one of the few shows I've seen where they simply accept sometimes people are going to be wearing masks and you won't be able to understand what they're saying. And that's kind of amusing to me. And they understand that there's been a darkness that has hovered over New York City for a year and a half, and a darkness that's beginning, hopefully, knock on wood, to part. And I think a lot of that is reflected very well in this new season because of COVID restrictions and all of that. I feel like there's maybe a little bit less group stuff. I feel like the skaters at the center of the story are maybe a little more spread out and disparate through the season. It's not just a straightforward hangout show, and I think maybe the show's at it's best when it is. But this is another show where when it got to the series finale, it tied things up really, really well, really emotionally, and I was engaged. It's such a fast show to go through. I think when we talked about it back when we had the showrunner on the podcast, we both talked about how we binged the show in a weekend, or in my case, it was an afternoon. Still totally easy to do that, and you can catch up in a second. You can watch the movie, which is also easily available to stream. I am a big fan of Betty, so watch Betty. Sticking with things premiering or returning for a second season, in this case to a new home, Netflix canceled Tuca and Birdie for reasons I still just don't understand. I mean, presumably the answer is literally no one watched it, but we don't know, so we can't say. It seems odd that they would want a straggling one-season animated show on their with great critical acclaim on their service for no particular reason, and then not continue with it, but that's on them. It's back on Adult Swim this weekend, and this is just a show that I like so much. The new episodes, critics have been sent 4 of them. They are as crazy, as surreal, as joyful, as fun, as stealthily emotional as the first season of the show. So if you didn't like the first season of the show, obviously you're not going to like this. But if you did, it's great to have all these characters, great vocal work by Stephen Yeun, by Ali Wong, by Tiffany Haddish, by a huge cast of guest voices, so many amusing and weird and random guest voices. And it's a show that takes big emotional swings. It's a show that tries things that you wouldn't necessarily think would work. It's a show that deals deeply with psychological issues, with emotional issues, with codependence, and that honors these experiences, even if they're coming from a group of animated birds. And I like the show a tremendous amount. And again, so these are the first 3 shows are all these sort of little-ish shows. I think Lupin was ultimately not little at all. It was pretty big by the time it grew, but got those. I can talk briefly about Loki, but I assume people have probably watched it. I liked the first 2 episodes of Loki. I also thought they were incredibly heavy on exposition. And you heard Michael Waldron talking about that earlier on the podcast, talking about the approach to both make sure that audiences could understand things, but also to, at some point, get past exposition. To me, the pleasure of watching Tom Hiddleston and watching Owen Wilson and watching the world of the Time Variance Authority get built out was worth it. And I wasn't worried about the fact that sometimes it doesn't feel like things are happening. But, you know, it's a minor concern, but I still enjoyed that a lot. Also coming out this weekend is Blind Spotting, and that will be on Starz. It is a TV adaptation of the 2018 movie, and the movie was created by Rafael Casal and David Diggs, and they starred in the movie. Now, David Diggs is not in the TV show at all, though he did write a lot of it with Rafael Casal. But it focuses primarily on the character of Rafael Casal's wife, who is featured, or rather girlfriend, who is featured in the movie, but is now the centerpiece, and played by Jasmine Cephas Jones. And she's great. this is a show where you do not need to have seen the movie to understand what's happening, but maybe you need to have seen the movie to immediately jump into the tone, because there are dance sequences that just break out briefly for 10 seconds and then are gone. There's spoken word poetry that is delivered in a particularly hyper stylized way. And so you have to get used to it a little bit. And if you've seen the movie, you don't need to get used to it as much. You know it's coming. It's just a thing to acknowledge. I thought that the series was very, very good. It does a lot of the things that the movie does. It is not a subtle show, but it's a show that aims for a lot of big swing conversations about whether it's the gentrification of Oakland or our prison system or the legalization of drugs and the people who are still in prison for drug-related crimes associated with things that are now legal. There's a lot of stuff here that is very, very timely and very, very smartly done, frequently very funny. There are a handful of characters who return for the movie. There are a handful of new characters. Living next door to the Ashley character, there's a former convict named Earl, who's played by Benjamin Earl Turner, who is just one of my favorite new characters of the season. He is charming and odd and weird and not like any character I've seen on TV before. And I found myself with so much affection for that character so immediately. The series also features Helen Hunt, who, you sort of forget is this Emmy-winning comic actress who at some point won an Oscar and then became more serious than she had been for most of her career. And she is very, very funny here as kind of a former hippie. And there's a lot of very interesting stuff here. It is still not a subtle series, and it is not going to be for everybody, but I dug the big swings it was taking and appreciated most of what it was doing in the 6 episodes I've seen. So, deep breath, deep breath. That's a lot of TV.
And we'll have Blind Spotting showrunner Rafael Casal with us next week for a showrunner spotlight interview. Well, Dan, that feels like a good place to wrap things up. Thank you all for listening to TV's Top 5, the Hollywood Reporters TV podcast. For more of Dan's weekly recommendations, be sure to subscribe to THR's Now See This newsletter.
Also, be sure to subscribe on all of your various podcasting platforms to our wonderful podcast, If you like us, rate us. If you really like us, write a little reviewy thing. It helps spread the word of mouth and whatnot. We're always happy to chat with you guys on Twitter. Let us know what's working, what's not working, what you'd like us to talk about. Thanks to Netflix opening a store, we didn't need a mailbag segment this week, but we might next week. You just never know what's going to come up in the news. So if you have questions for future mailbag segments, email us at TV's Top 5 at THR.com. That's TV's Top 5, the numeral 5, at THR.com. Until next week, Lesley.
Until next week, Dan.